Across Russia, memorials for Alexei Navalny were small and muted. For years, the Kremlin has been crushing his supporters. More were detained Friday night. It was only outside Russia where people could freely express their anguish and anger. This crowd protested across the street from the Russian embassy in London.
I still you can't believe that thing. It's just too painful.
Navalny's final days were spent here, a remote, harsh penal colony north of the Arctic Circle. Prison officials said the 47-year-old lost consciousness after returning from a walk and couldn't be revived. On Thursday, he appeared in court by video link. He seemed in good spirits, even joking with the judge, which is why news of his death was stunning to so many. Blame immediately fell on Russia's president, Vladimir Putin. Navalny's wife, Yulia, took the stage at a security conference in Munich.
I
want Putin and all of his entourage, Putin's friends and his government to know that they will be held accountable for what they have done to our country, to my family and to my husband, she said. Navalny had spent years challenging the Kremlin and corruption in Russia. In 2020, he nearly died on board a flight from Siberia. He'd been poisoned with a nerve agent. While recovering in Germany, he was asked what his message would be if he was killed.
When I'm killed, it's very simple, not give up.
He chose to return to Russia a few months later, well aware of what was waiting. He was immediately imprisoned.
We tried to do everything we could to help him.
Alexander Palupin is one of dozens of Russian doctors who signed a letter pleading with the Kremlin to show mercy, as Navalny was losing weight and frequently kept in solitary confinement.
The Kremlin didn't like his popularity, and all they can say that he had no support in Russia, but he had a really big support.
Putin didn't mention Navalny at all while touring this factory Friday. He's destined to win his 5th term as president next month, because no opposition is allowed in Putin's Russia. Mourners are not even given the chance to grieve a man who so publicly challenged the Kremlin.
So, Briar, with Navalny's voice now silenced, who could fill the void?
Well, Ian, it really is hard to see anyone emerging in Russia to challenge the Kremlin at this point, and that's because the level of repression just keeps increasing. And the Kremlin really is trying to make a point to go after anybody that even slightly challenges the official line. For instance, lawmakers just passed a bill that allows authorities to confiscate property for anyone accused of spreading fake news about the army. And this is really a deliberate attempt to go after Russians who have left and are living abroad but are criticizing the government online.
Briar Stewart reporting from London. World leaders were swift in their condemnation of Vladimir Putin, saying Alexei Navalny's death was Putin's fault. Now, as Paul Hunter lays out the question for Western leaders, how to respond.
On the death of Alexei Navalny, U.S. President Joe Biden was blunt.
Make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Navalny's death. Putin is responsible.
Likewise, condemnation and fury aimed at Vladimir Putin globally.
No one can look at this regime now and not recognize it for the truly dreadful nature that it has.
Anyone who criticizes Putin, said German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, anyone who stands up for democracy in Russia must fear for their safety and their lives. From Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, this reminder to all.
Double and triple down in our resolve as Canadians and as a country to continue to stand up against Putin.
Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray, wrote on X, Putin murdered Navalny just as surely as if he'd strangled him with his bare hands. But such labeling is hardly new for Vladimir Putin, long accused of eliminating his opponents by any means possible, poisoning, bombing, imprisoning, and going to war. Indeed, as Putin's Russian assault on Ukraine continues, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said this on word of Navalny's death.
Alexei Navalny, очевидно, він убитий Путіним.
Obviously, he was killed by Putin, he said. He must be held accountable for what he has done. The question is, what will be done? In 2021, U.S. President Biden vowed if Navalny were to die in prison, there would be devastating consequences for Russia. And so, say some,
if you're going to publicly state that the consequences for the death of Alexei Navalny are to be devastating, then those words have to be filled with action. And if they are not, then the world will conclude that the American president's word is not worth all that much.
Biden underlines much has changed since he made that pledge, including what he called great sanctions across the board against Russia over its war on Ukraine. But on whether more sanctions will now follow Navalny's death,
We're looking at a whole number of options. That's all I'll say right now.
And Paul, in the United States, this is, of course, an election year.
Yeah, and so by this time next year, it could be Joe Biden as president or Donald Trump facing Vladimir Putin, and that could bring a very different tone. Trump has yet to comment on Navalny's death, but we heard him a week ago, in effect, saying to Putin, as far as he's concerned, Russia could do, quote, whatever the hell they want to NATO countries that don't spend more on defense. Biden weighed in on that today, calling Trump's comments dangerous and pledging, if Biden's reelected, absolute support for NATO countries against Putin.
Paul Hunter in Washington.